If you're a modern human being, you probably enjoy happy chemicals getting released in your brain and potentially have a crippling dependency on video games in order to achieve this. Well, do I have good news for you. Because Cult of the Lamp is a game with so much gameplay that you'll be asking yourself what game you're actually playing 10 hours into your playthrough. What the fuck? It's the end result of taking some mechanics from all of your favorite games and cramming them into one. A base building, colony, and resource management foundation sprinkled with roguelite mechanics and gambling, vast amounts of unlocks and skills to switch up your builds, wrapped up into a beautiful art style. Oh, and of course there is a fishing minigame as well. Explaining this game in any more detail would be like explaining to your mother why you have so many edited pictures of One Piece characters saved on your phone. Challenging. So what better way to talk about the game than to superficially touch upon all of its mechanics in a very short time span. Starts off with you getting saved from sacrificial, well, sacrifice, giving you no choice but to start running a cult in your newfound savior's name, and have fanatics and sycophants follow your every word and sermon. They'll provide you with free labor in exchange for blessings while you're off doing important, world-changing work. In reality, this means you're just cleaning up their feces because they're still just wild animals with absolutely no concept of hygiene. The game is marketed as a roguelite, so naturally the main gameplay loop is balancing out, and by balancing out I mean maxing out, the 3 sliders your cult runs on: food, hygiene, and faith. It's by far the highest maintenance part of the game, and sure as hell wasn't written about in any holy scripture or how to run a cult for dummies guidebook. Did I say roguelite? Oh well. Food's an easy one, you just cook it and the dipshits will eat it, and sometimes it may even have some bonus effects. Hygiene's even easier, you just clean up after these lobotomites. But faith is by far the most important one, because if it drops too low, this peaceful and quaint little paradise will be in flames in the blink of an eye. Followers will literally start rioting and steal money from your cult before fucking off entirely. Thankfully, you get loads of opportunities to deal with this problem as well. For instance, putting dissenters in jail in order to re-educate them and for everyone to laugh at is the humane solution to dealing with people who disagree with you. Anyway, besides the global cult resources, another one you have to manage for each follower individually is their loyalty, which increases as you bless your followers, give them bountiful gifts, or do absolutely psychotic quests for them. No, seriously, the quests these devious little freaks give you are absolutely insane. Oh yes, my dear leader, I would love nothing more than to eat a meal made from the feces you have collected over the past week. Oh, glorious leader, please, kill this other cult member for me. It would be such a funny prank, Lamal, they will never see it coming. It's even funnier when during the first days after release, these quests would sometimes bug out, targeting a member of my cult who had already died, meaning that if I accepted it, it would instantly fail the quest and I'd lose a tremendous amount of faith immediately. And guess what? Declining it makes you take a hit anyway, just not as much. I literally had to resurrect the cultist that kept getting targeted by these quests just so I could finally stop getting punished for killing him 2 days prior. And then they didn't even give me any more quests targeting him. But I digress. Neglect may also leave your cultists faithless, like your favorite streamer not even acknowledging your exorbitant gifts. Going on a 10-minute long crusade can have disastrous consequences for your cult. If you prepare it insufficiently ahead of time, there's a good chance one of your followers will get sick, die of old age, or starve, causing your faith to plummet while you're out securing the bag. And some little freaks might even start dissenting. So keeping your faith high is quintessential to your success in this game, and the quickest way to raise it back up, if it ever drops low, is rituals. As an eldritch entity worshipping cult, you get access to plenty of these, and they usually raise your faith alongside some other effect, like raising your cult's hunger back to full or giving you or your cult some temporary buffs. This is also where you can, send your followers into an eternal journey to enlightenment. A great way of disposing of the elderly because, contrary to popular belief, age does improve your value as a person. You could also appoint a tax collector who will passively and very slowly collect money from your followers and be the single most respected member of your cult, until they get elderly and, because you gotta earn your retirement somehow, just start pocketing the money for themselves. Or sometimes you just wanna disregard all of your cult's needs and just go on a several days spanning fishing trip. For the fish fear me as much as the women do. Now here's a little pro tip. Collect yourself a bunch of mushrooms and complete this freak's questline as soon as possible, because if you do, he will unlock the brainwashing ritual for you which is objectively the most powerful ritual in the game. It will lock your faith at max for a few in-game days, meaning that nothing can drop it at all anymore. Sure, some of your followers might overdose on shrooms and get sick, but that's nothing a little bed rest can't fix. And the best part is that after getting some upgrades to lower ritual cooldowns, the cooldown on the ritual is essentially the same length as its effect. So you can just keep your dudes permanently hopped up on shrooms. I'm not exaggerating when I say how vital this ritual is in the late game. As you progress into the later dungeons, the runs get pretty long and sometimes span several in-game days, and without this ritual, your cult would almost assuredly go up in flames in your absence. Now, if you thought I was done talking about the game's mechanics and unlocks, you'd almost be right, but also very wrong. So there's commandments, which are mutually exclusive unlocks that grant you a choice between new rituals or passive perks for your cult. Then there's divine inspiration, which is unlocked by the devotion your followers generate passively over time, which is then used to unlock new buildings alongside some other upgrades. Next up, you've got sermons and the distinct devotion that they generate, which give you access to new weapon types and curses to use during your runs, making your life a little bit easier when gathering resources. And finally, you've got fleeces and boss perks unlocked by collecting fragments from side quests or defeating major bosses respectively. Now, if your little brain cannot possibly keep track of the 54 different upgrade trees and systems the game has, don't worry about it, because you'll pretty much just unlock everything passively by the time you beat the game. Okay, Surny, but what do you actually do during the roguelite runs? Well, besides peacefully spreading the message of your cult by brutally murdering some big meanies, you're mainly collecting resources for your cult. Food, building materials, money, and new and willing devotees. The combat feels extremely tight and is so fast-paced that you're basically forced to constantly be on the move, as neglecting to do so for even just a mere moment will result in certain death. So your tools in order to fulfill this job are a weapon and a curse, and you get one each. And these weapons all have slightly unique and different playstyles. Let's just start with the sword. A classic one, decently quick and damaging, can't really go wrong with it. The dagger is way faster, matter of fact it's the fastest weapon in the game, and it does piss all damage and falls off tremendously against tankier enemies, but it's pretty nice to use in the early game. Now the mighty axe is a heavy hitter that will usually allow you to get a couple of hits in at most before having to dodge, but it just feels so good to slice away at enemies with. And a hammer is just an axe on steroids. You can barely get a single hit off before having to move, but landing one just releases happy chemicals in my brain. I love this thing. Oh yeah, I guess there's also the gauntlets, which are just utter dog shit. Like, some dude really came up with the idea for a wacky weapon where you have to commit to standing still for a full combo for 2 whole seconds in a fast-paced combat system where you literally do not have the time to do so. And don't even think about dodging, you absolute buffoon, because if you do, the combo just resets and your damage output is non-existent. Gauntlets, more like reset your run, because you'll probably be dying with these regardless. Anyway, each weapon can also have an elemental type of sorts. Poison works pretty well on a dagger, as you can imagine. Crit boosts work well on an axe, and the rare godly type that just increases the base damage substantially works really well on the hammer. And what about curses? Well, they're just ranged spells, projectiles, AoEs, or big sweeps, and require fervor to use, which you get from hitting or killing enemies. Another mechanic shamelessly stolen from Hollow Knight. And some of these can be charged, and if let go at the right time, their effectiveness is increased substantially. So there's your skill mechanic, you nerd. And just like weapons, these can also come in different quote-unquote elemental varieties. My favorite element being invulnerability. You know, I went to see a mystic woman once to have my future read, and as she was reading the cards, she passed out and died. Turns out there was a gas leak in the tent and I never actually got my money back. But anyway, the joke's on her, because I learned how to read the cards myself, and buddy, the future is looking bright. I'll be using 50% extra curses and generating twice the fervor when killing enemies, allowing me to spam invulnerability during the boss fight and completely trivialize the whole damn thing. Because the game decided to give me the most broken synergy over the course of a 90-second time span. So yeah, tarot cards are power-ups for your runs, you know, stat increases and the like. And let me tell ya, nothing quite beats the feeling of getting a rainbow foil Death's Door for the 3rd time in a row. It's a useless piece of shit. In an economy, the workforce is vital. There are jobs to be done, and you need workers to do them. So more is better, right? Wrong. Because your cult size is actually a balancing act of how much workforce you require and how much food you can provide. These little fuckers will starve very quickly and are incapable of caring for themselves. And because a dead worker is a useless worker, you're gonna have to care for them. And unless you want 100% of your time to be dedicated to making sure these idiots don't punch their own tickets, you'll want to limit how many of them are around. Now, there's no exact science to how many work well. It depends on your difficulty setting, and in order to beat the game, you will never need more than 20. I usually hovered around 12 for most of the game because it allows you to clear almost every requirement until the final boss, at which point I just took in a few more disposable souls to unlock and beat that guy. However, despite what you may think, collecting more followers even at your arbitrary capacity limit is absolutely possible, because they will just sit there in the queue and prostrate themselves to you until you properly indoctrinate them. They're not gonna age, starve, or die of illness because they can get sick for some reason, and they'll just sit in limbo until you need them. Right, so imagine you're playing chess and you've just blundered one of your pieces in an absolutely inane fashion. What if, instead of jumping through several hoops, you could just instead instantaneously respawn a new one right away and pick up where you left off? I don't actually play chess, but I'm sure a mechanic like this could really revitalize the old stale meta. Anyway, if one of your followers ever mysteriously disappears overnight, they can simply be replaced by a new and willing young lad out of the queue to pick up where work was left off. Now, replacing your old and dying workforce does have one drawback, that being the previously mentioned cultist level. Because as you level up their loyalty, you don't just get rewarded with some points for arbitrary resource number 4, but also actually affect quite a few things that this cultist does. One major thing I've yet to even mention is the summoning circle, where you can allow a demon to borrow one of your followers as a vessel for the next crusade and grant you some very powerful assistance. There's different types, and whichever one your cultist becomes is random and specific to that cultist, but their power increases as the cultist level does, so you're incentivized to keep them around for as long as possible and level them up. These demons become incredibly useful in the late game, and there's basically no downside to using them besides a tiny cooldown period for the cultists in question. You can really find some newfound appreciation and love for someone's virtual version when they're a high-level bonus health demon and turn you into a literal tank. Because of this, there may be more of an incentive to bring back an old deceased friend instead of inducting someone new, because resurrecting actually both preserves their previous level and turns them young again, allowing them to live yet another full lifespan. Very helpful if you've got an incredibly high-level exploder that will one-shot nearly every enemy it encounters. Besides this, cultist level also affects their value, both physical and spiritual. They'll generate more devotion when praying and be way more valuable if you choose to sacrifice them. Finally, there's the missionary, which, to be quite honest, I barely ever used. You can send your followers off to gather some resources for you, but if they're low level, the chance of success doesn't even matter because they'll just come back to die in your arms regardless. Now, while automating the leveling of your cultists is possible if you appoint a loyalty enforcer, you'll make most progress by simply interacting with and bribing every single one individually, which will consume a lot of your time and, if you value your sanity, is another reason to limit the amount of followers you have. As you may know, one of the main selling points of the roguelite genre is the incredible amount of replayability the games tend to have. Even after unlocking everything, you can still sink hundreds of hours into the game because the variance in runs is high enough and the gameplay interesting enough to make every single run just a little bit different. And unfortunately, this is where Cult of the Lamb falls a little short. Because after beating the final boss, there is very little incentive to actually keep playing. Besides maybe optimizing your cult a little further or decorating your little paradise, there's no real goal to strive towards. The combat feels great and fun, but the runs are really short and interspersed with long and by the late game almost mind-numbing management sessions, and enemy and gear variety is rather low. You could argue that instead starting a new save could prove as nice replayability considering the commandments are mutually exclusive. But unfortunately, there's usually an objectively better choice to choose, or the choice is rather inconsequential either way. And every other upgrade tree beyond that is always the same, though I guess you could switch up the order in what you prioritize. So unless you're going for 100% unlocks or chivos, you'll find very little replay value. Now, if I may interject for just a moment, because of the absolutely astronomical speed at which I work on these videos, there's bound to be some new content and updates to the game by the time you're actually watching this, and the devs seem committed to support the game with a trickle of new stuff, at least for a while, so there's a chance that this lack of end-game replayability stuff could be alleviated at least a little bit. That's not to say the game isn't thoroughly enjoyable though. The game is positively addictive, and throughout the entire playthrough keeps you hooked with this little drip feed of new mechanics slowly getting added to the complexity of running your cult. You'll be running your errands and thinking to yourself, oh yeah, I want to do that too, and that, just ticking off your mental checklist while some neuron in your brain will fire and make you feel satisfied. And the combat just feels so damn satisfying because there's nothing quite like weaving your way through a room stock full of enemies and hitting pot shots wherever you can. It's just a really good game. That's it. That's the video. What you expect, like a score? Fuck you, there's no arbitrary rating. I'm out.